And that's kind of the issue with a lot of the traditional therapy, cognitive-based therapy, that lie down on the couch, let's talk about your problems, let's talk about your family life, your parents, your childhood, and you're just going to basically relive the traumas. You're reliving whatever that trauma was. And then, okay, time's up. I'll see you next week. All right, let's go back into that trauma. And now you're reliving it again. It's a very traumatic thing to just relive the trauma all the time. And so with psychedelics, we're able to shut down the default mode network and give you a third eye or like a bird's eye view of you, the trauma, how that person might have thought about it, how that group of people might have thought about it, what made them think that way or act that way. It's so powerful that you can relive something without actually, the body and the mind thinking, oh my God, I'm there again. People want to get over their stuff. They don't want to have to relive it.
What's happening, beautiful people? Welcome back to the Thrive After Sports podcast. This is a phenomenal episode with Nick Murray, the founder of Wake Network. Wake Network is focused on creating wellness, well, in many different ways, as you'll hear through the episode. But one of the main ways is hosting clinical retreats for people to try psilocybin or magic mushrooms. They're doing incredible work. I actually came across Nick and Wake Network through a documentary on ESPN called Peace of Mind. I'll link that in the show notes. You guys can check that out. Incredible documentary. What they do in the documentary is bring some former professional athletes down to Jamaica for a retreat. They all try psilocybin. And I don't want to spoil it for you, but they all have some breakthroughs. And as you guys may or may not know, I'm a huge proponent of psychedelics and plant medicines. Psilocybin has made a huge difference in my life. I probably do a small dose of psilocybin or mushrooms, once a week on average, I'd say. It's made a huge difference for me in more ways than one, which you will probably hear in the episode. I've talked about plant medicines before on this podcast with Anna Simons, episode 182 with Anna Simons. We talk about her work, her advocacy in the plant medicine space, and we also shared, both of our experience with plant medicines. And then episode 82, I want to say, I probably should have looked this up before I started recording, but episode 94. So episode 182 with Anna Simons, or episode 94 with Joe Hawley, who's a former NFL lineman, and interviewed me about my experience with plant medicines of all varieties. So anyway, look, I'm not advocating for anyone to try something that they're not ready for, but really we're just trying to, through having these conversations, I'm hoping to change the stigma that certain psychedelics or plant medicines get, and understanding how they can be used as a tool to not only improve your mental health, but just your overall well-being. I'm a person who has dealt with depression and just I get down a lot. And so sometimes for no reason at all, maybe that's due to head trauma from football, or maybe it's just hereditary stuff, who knows? But at the end of the day, what I do know is that plant medicines have made a big difference for me in more ways than one. So enjoy this episode with Nick Murray. All the links to connect with Nick and find out more about Wake Network will be in the show notes. And you'll hear at the end of this episode, we announced a partnership. ThriveAfterSports is partnering with Wake Network in order to bring more of these retreats to more athletes. So I'm trying to help more athletes get access to these retreats, get access to psilocybin. And yeah, let's get into it. This intro is long enough. I love you guys. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for sharing this episode. I'm seeing a lot of you guys are sharing lately. So if you haven't shared an episode, please, anytime you hear an episode that resonates with you, just share it with somebody who could benefit from it. Like the video if you're watching on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel if you're listening on Apple or Spotify. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already, and please click the 5-star button. I love you guys. Let's get into this episode with Nick Murray from Wake Network. Peace. Well, first and foremost, man, thank you for even taking some time to do this. I know the last conversation we had was super impactful, and I'm excited for some things that we're going to be working on in the near future. But just a little bit of backstory for the audience. I'm watching this Peace of Mind documentary on ESPN. And I'm just blown away. There were actually times where I got choked up watching it because I thought about my own experience with psilocybin and, ways that it's changed me in more ways than one. But matter of fact, Nick, before we get into it, can you just talk a little bit about the documentary? You'll be able to explain Peace of Mind better than I will.
Sure. Yeah. And thanks for the invite, Taj. I really appreciate it. The documentary was a long time in the making. We did our first mushroom psilocybin retreat in Jamaica in March 2019, and March 2020. And literally a week into it, we had done both doses with all of our guests, and COVID, came out of nowhere and basically forced us to kind of end the retreat a day early. And so then we had the interest from the ESPN crew out of, the photography and the video from the first retreat. Everybody kind of expected COVID to be, a few months. So we started eagerly working on it with the team over at ESPN. And then it just kind of kept on getting delayed and delayed. So it was literally 2 years before we could actually do what we had been working on, which was good because it gave us even more time to discuss things, plan things, get it all ready. And then 2 years after our first retreat, which was actually the first retreat outside of COVID, was with the ESPN crew. So they sent down a crew of 5, wonderful team that really, it was more than a job. It felt like they really wanted to capture the feeling, capture the stories pre and post. It felt like a labor of love from their side. And so we had a mixture of athletes from boxing to wrestling to hockey that really came down with their own stories. And they were, in a lot of ways, they were at the end of their rope. They were really tired of all of the different things they had tried. Some of these guys were pro athletes. They had had some of the best doctors and the best specialists in the business look at their case, try out different things, try out different drugs. And, that frustration when you just want to get normal, whatever normal is, and it just keeps, the goalposts keep moving. And so you could just see it in the conversations in their eyes that they were just like, man, I hope this helps. And it was a beautiful 5 days we had with all of these athletes. They came down with their, they came down really wanting to do it. It's not like they were there like, damn, I shouldn't be here. It was really like, I'm a believer, even though most of them hadn't tried psychedelics at all. And they were really liberal with their stories. I mean, I thank all of them from the deepest part of my heart that they bared their souls, they bared their stories, they were honest with the camera. And, we've heard from a lot of people as a result of that piece with ESPN. So it was a wonderful documentary. It came out beautifully. Riley Cote, a close friend, a good brother, really was, the man in the middle of making it happen. And he brought down a really close friend that you'll see in the doc. I don't want to spoil it at all, but he brought down a close colleague, teammate that just had a wonderful experience. And he's become a really good friend of mine now as well, named Steve. So the whole thing was beautiful. Multiple stories, different unique pathways that they got to us, but all a very raw, kind of honest piece from what brought them there, how it made them feel, and then how they were after the experience.
I think beautiful is a perfect way to describe it, man. That was definitely, it was indeed a beautiful documentary. And I encourage everybody to go check it out. I'll link it in the show notes, or you can just look up Peace of Mind on ESPN. And, I don't even think I shared this with you the first time we met, Nick. You talk about people being at the end of their rope. The first time I actually tried psilocybin. Is it psilocybin or psilocybin? I heard you. I'm like, let me make sure I'm saying it correctly. Have I been saying it wrong?
No, man, it's either. It's kind of like tomato.
Okay.
So don't worry.
The first time I tried psilocybin was, I was actually going through a really dark depression while I was in college, still playing football. I wasn't getting playing time. I was into it with the coaches a lot of time, a lot of arguments and stuff. And, I was really in a dark place. And a teammate of mine, shout out to Dominic Reyes, he fights in the UFC now, who I've had on the podcast, actually introduced me to magic mushroom, psilocybin, for the first time. I had no idea, I was just a college kid. Like, sure, I'll try it. You got some drugs, I'll try them, whatever. I had no idea that it would transform, my way of thinking. I always say there's a version of me before I tried psilocybin and a version after, at the age of 19, just like completely shifted. And I, have been connected with the plant ever since, and always trying to incorporate that into my life because I know it gives me a different perspective and can kind of keep me out of some of those dark places that I have a tendency to naturally go to. So, but enough about me, man. I want to get into your journey, your backstory. Before you founded, before Wake was ever even an idea in your mind. I just want to hear more about your life leading up to this point.
Sure. Yeah. I like to say I was born a geek. I literally came out with a laptop. Soy Llama must not have been easy delivering. But it's just been my MO since I was like 5, 6. When the first computer came to the class, I was taking it apart and I was figuring it out, and it's just how I'm made up. And so I've kind of followed that my whole life. But in my heart, I was always interested in medicine and healthcare. And my mom's a nurse. So, there was always like, maybe you'll be a doctor, and just wasn't really what I wanted to do. So I kind of found my own path as far as how do I leverage technology to help people on their health journeys. And so kind of out of school, once I was like mid-20s, I went on to the entrepreneurial route and started making software for healthcare. And that was, that's a whole other podcast, that story. And I took a company public in Canada, and it did really well. And I realized, okay, I like to build stuff. And I just want to kind of be in that nexus between technology and healthcare and be the bridge in the middle. And so I was building the last one I just mentioned, and met a girl, fell deeply in love. And we were like, in our 20s, and within like kind of meeting her to 30 to 60 days later, we were in love. I got in a wild car accident, was thrown from the car blew up in flames, and she was diagnosed with cancer. And so it was like one of those, like, you just never expect it at any age, but definitely like kind of in your younger years, you just think you're invincible. And so fast forward, she decided not to go with kind of the conventional jump right into chemo. And we moved down to Costa Rica and went the natural route, and met a ton of people from, medical doctors to like the jungle woo woo, as far as the whole spectrum. We wanted to really just gulp it up and learn as much as we could. And so that was plant medicine, that was mushroom medicine, that was meditation. I mean, it was a crash course basically in alternative or natural therapy. And I learned a lot, and I really started to really respect it. Not that I hadn't before, but to see somebody you love so much being helped by these different modalities was like, okay, there's definitely something here. And that's really where it was forged, where I thought, the natural world is not getting the respect it deserves. And people don't know any better because, the clinical trials are basically positioned for the synthetics. So, they cost so much money that unless you're going to get a patent at the end of it, it just doesn't make sense to do the clinical trial. And if it's natural, you can't get a patent. So you can see how anything natural that does work just doesn't get tested. If it doesn't get tested, it can't be prescribed. So I saw this racket basically, and I thought, how can I help use technology and medical tools that the doctors and the nurses of the world and the researchers are used to? So speak their language, but help the natural medical world, bring a lot of this to light. So that's really where it started for me. And a few years later, I saw mushrooms helping more people around me. And I was living part-time in Mexico, where they have a wonderful little town called San Jose del Pacifico, where it's up in the mountains, and it's literally a mushroom town. And it just is. They grow there naturally. It's been in their culture for millennia, and everyone, it's their rite of passage. So when you said 19, I was kind of smiling inside, thinking like, that's a good age, because in San Jose at 14, like kind of the rite of passage age, they give the boys and the girls of the community a mushroom, a psychedelic journey, and that's their bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, getting drunk in the bush, whatever we do when we're 13, 14, Instead of that, they're doing mushrooms. And it's like, what a way to enter, adulthood. And I wish more people had that. So anyway, so all of that to say, I thought, then my next company, I want it to be mushroom based, psychedelic based. And that was back in November 2019. And then, as I said, we did our first retreat in March 2020. And then the rest has been history.
Wow. We will definitely talk more about Wake, but can we talk a little bit more about what was your first time? Like, what was your experience personally doing shrooms for the first time?
Man, to be honest, it was at a party in Canada. I grew up in Canada, and we would have bush parties. That's how the Canadians do. And so we would find a spot in the bush that nobody owned or nobody knew, and us rambunctious teenagers would get together. So it was a campfire, it was mushrooms, and it wasn't like a super high dose, which is great because, I probably would have just been lying in the tent somewhere. But I just remember how full of energy and talkative I was. And it really kind of opened my eyes without like blowing my mind, which was good. Because a lot of people, they take too much and then they never try it again. And then they kind of miss out on a big opportunity. So that was my first dabble with mushrooms. And then I guess my first impactful psychedelic journey was out Western Canada with some friends, and it was with DMT, and it was a very just a magical moment where we found this really, nobody knew this area on the island, and it just had this big circle of shells. And I guess somebody had just set it up for meditating or what it was, but it was a perfect place to try a psychedelic. And so there was the four of us, and I volunteered to be the first one. And I did the DMT, and I looked out at the ocean, and I looked down at the grass underneath me, and that really, really, really woke me up. That was probably my most transformative initial experience to really feel the power. And for those of your audience that don't know, DMT is a very fast acting psychedelic. So you're in and out in like 20 minutes, which if you're not experienced, it can be a lot. There's no sickness, but you're in and out. It's not like you're literally taking the elevator instead of the stairs, both up and then down. So it's good for a lot of things. It's really interesting for the medical community because they want something that's not going to take 4 to 6 hours, because that's kind of how our medical system is set up, right? These kind of like no more than 1 hour consults in a clinical room. So DMT will be interesting to see how that one shakes up. But that was my most experienced or most kind of influential experience that I had.
Why do you think there's such a stigma? Like, because I think most people, I think DMT, psilocybin, any of these acid, anything that kind of falls into that psychedelic category, maybe not so much these days. I think the world is opening up, but for the most part, a lot of people think, oh, hippie, or, if you're going to do if you're going to do mushrooms, you're going to see little pink elephants and stuff running around. They don't really understand what the experience is like, which obviously impacts medical research and legalization and things like that. But why do you think even in today's age, there's still such a stigma from like society at large, let alone the medical community?
Man, that's a good question, Taj. It's there's a few. It's many paths lead to the same issue, I guess you could say. Like the first one would be just unknowing, right? People just are scared of something that they don't understand or that they haven't tried. Psychedelics, we're starting to understand more how they work, why they work, but still it's, even the mind itself is an unknown. It's a common quote that we know more about the solar system than we do about, up here. And it's true. And so I think there's just the unknowing. Then there's just the baggage, right? There's just like the movies, some of the news, some of the this is your brain on drugs, all that stuff we grew up with. And has been with our society literally since Nixon kind of made it all illegal in the early 70s. So it's 50, 60 years of kind of perpetual baggage that's tough to or difficult to unwind or, to kind of reverse. And then third, just doesn't have big marketing. We're in a consumer culture where if it's not on the cover of Time and on CNN and sponsored by, and then, we don't trust it, which is kind of interesting. I mean, it's when you look at where the money is spent, if it was so good, i.e. alcohol, big pharma, then why would you have to spend so much money? And it's a good kind of thought experiment where you look at how much money is spent on marketing and lobbying, and then, things kind of make a little more sense. So I think there's a multitude of reasons, but the good thing is cannabis really did open the door in a lot of ways and changed people's perspective. I think a lot of people had the Chicken Little kind of, the world's going to end if we legalize this plant. And then it's been legalized in most states in the US, at least medically, and things are okay. And so I think that the cannabis took a lot longer than psilocybin has. And also, to be honest, there's less of a racial stigma with psilocybin. I mean, if you look back to the history of legalizing or criminalizing cannabis, it was definitely with racial kind of overtones at the time, and continues to. And so you've got a lot of people in jail for cannabis and not many on psychedelics. So I think there's a lot of, who knows, right? I'm just supposing here, but I think there's a lot of, if we make cannabis federally legal, we're going to have to release millions of people out of jail, and they don't want to do that, right? And so I feel like there's something there as well, but I'm just guessing.
No, I think you're spot on with that, man. I think also, at least from what I've seen, when it comes to psychedelics specifically, like what you brought up about marijuana, is you were spot on with that. I agree with you 100%. And in the world of psychedelics, I feel like there's this, almost people look at it as a party drug, right? Not just, it's like people do when they just want to go out and have fun and yes, there's an element of that, but I think what gets overlooked is how it can be used as a tool, which I mean, you have developed an entire business around this, giving people access to this for the purpose of using it as a tool. So can you just talk a little bit about, and you guys have to go watch this documentary. You might need to just pause this podcast and go back and watch Peace of Mind. Just go check that out, because that is, you get to see firsthand how it's being used as a tool to be able to help people, like you said, help people overcome things that they're dealing with when they were at the end of their rope, like you said. So I guess what I'm really asking you is, in a long-winded way, is when it comes to viewing psychedelics, specifically psilocybin, as a tool, how do you navigate that conversation, or maybe, introduce people in a way where they could start looking at it that way versus like something you just do for fun?
Yeah, I mean, documentary, some of the research. There's a few books like How to Change Your Mind, Fantastic Fungi. So there's, in a media culture, there's a fair bit of media to help the conversation. So it's not just us trying to promote it. It's helpful for people to understand how it makes kind of me feel, or talk to other athletes how it makes them feel, because there's so much interest, there's so much curiosity in the world, whether it's from the research world, the medical world, or just society at large, on what does it make you feel like? Am I going to go crazy? Am I going to run around naked? Am I going to say something I'm embarrassed by? Like, we get all the same questions, Taj. It's really interesting because of, just the fears out there. So for me personally, when I'm talking to anyone, athlete or not, that's interested in coming down, or just I meet out, in public, and they're asking about what we do, it's helpful to explain a few things. That first, you're going to remember everything. That's really important for people to understand, that you're not under like a hypnotist spell. You're going to snap out and be like, what did I just do? It's really beautiful, because there's other drugs like ketamine that, we support, but it's called the dream drug. And it's called that because you do feel like you're having a dream. And just like a dream, it starts to fade real quick after the experience, which isn't that great. It's good that it's legal. It's good that it's offered in the US. So, I'm a supporter in that way. But, I remember, and everyone that's come down remembers their journeys like incredibly well, very crisp. So that's one point. Second is that after the journey, well, I'll stick with the journey. So in the journey, you're going to feel and see like a bird's eye view of you, of your life, of things that have happened to you. And you're going to be able to go through the good and the bad without emotion taking over your body. And that's kind of the issue with a lot of the traditional therapy, cognitive-based therapy, that lie down on the couch. Let's talk about your problems. Let's talk about your family life, your parents, your childhood. And you're just going to basically relive the traumas. And I mean, it's just the best thing that they had or that they've had for a while. But now you've got that, that cortisol flooding through your veins. You've got your heart rate going, your blood pressure's up. You're reliving whatever that trauma was. And then, okay, time's up. I'll see you next week. All right, let's go back into that trauma. And now you're reliving it again. And the body and the mind thinks it's real, like sees it as, oh my God, the tiger's there or whatever, person or thing happened. It's a very traumatic thing to just relive the trauma all the time. And so with psychedelics, we're able to shut down the default mode network and give you a third eye or like a bird's eye view of you, the trauma, how that person might have thought about it, how that group of people might have thought about it, what made them think that way or act that way. It's so powerful that you can relive something without actually, the body and the mind thinking, oh my God, I'm there again, and then you're just cloudy head. And then your, emotion takes over and you can't think clearly and you don't get past it. You just continue to relive it. So that's a huge piece. That's a big piece that is so difficult to explain because everyone's like, oh, not my trauma. I'll be angry. And, this person fucked me over and I'm not sorry to swear if this is a family, but and then, and so once you live it and once you've gone through it, that is a huge piece because people want to get over their stuff. They don't want to have to relive it. But how else do you go through it? How else do you deal with something other than, the traditional method of talk it out? How did that make you feel? All the basics, but, it hasn't helped a lot of people. So that's another one. And then thirdly is after the experience, people all say, now I have like something will happen. Somebody will cut me off in traffic or I'll see somebody's name on my, calling me. And I now have like that 1 to 2 seconds of like buffer time to think something through, to not instantly react or instantly knee-jerk reaction that I'm kind of embarrassed about later. I have time to like, okay, I just stubbed my toe. It's going to hurt. What am I going to do? Where do I need to go? Rather than just like suddenly like, into the fear and the anxiety and the everything that comes along with it. So those are like top 3. That really resonate for me to share with people and the people I've shared with, it really resonates with them.
Well, if those are your top 3, I got to ask you, Nick, do you have any more to share? Because I like this tangent you're on right now, man. This is great. I'm learning a lot in a sense that I feel like I can better explain the experience to people. Mm-hmm. Anything else that you think is important to know about the journey or the after effects?
Yeah, for sure. I'm happy to go on. A lot of people say that they just subconsciously, which leads into the conscious mind, that they want to be healthier. They stop or they really lower if they're a smoker, their cigarette intake or their coffee intake or alcohol, or all 3, that they're not like, they're not fighting it. They just literally like, no, I don't feel like coffee this morning, or no, I don't feel like smoking, or it's just less of a thing. They don't feel drawn to it. They don't feel like kind of, under the thumb of it. So that's a big thing that a lot of people don't come down because we don't really approach our marketing to say like, work on your addiction in Jamaica. It's not one of our focuses because addiction's so complex. So a lot of people come down with some substance abuse, but it's not really usually what they're leading with. They're leading with depression, anxiety, traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress. So that's one that bleeds into their food. They eat healthier after the experience, and that goes on for weeks, months. So this is something that we've had a lot of people come down and say like, I've never had a green smoothie before, and now like it's part of my weekly regimen, salads, like all that. It's just what it is. I think the body is just a little smarter, or whatever it is. People are more open to healthy eating and healthy lifestyle. One thing that's been interesting is when somebody from a couple comes down, and they usually, like, we have more people come down on their own than as a couple for whatever reason, probably like, kids, and maybe they just want to come down alone and deal with their stuff and then bring their spouse down. That's been really interesting because they usually end up bringing their spouse down after, or the spouse comes separately, because they say that it's difficult to explain the experience to their loved one without them also going through it. And that's kind of understandable. Like it is kind of like going to another country in a way, where, you know, the sights are different, the smells, the tastes, everything's different. And you're trying to explain, you know, going to Mars and how they don't have cars. And it's like, well, how do they get around? And it's like, well, you know, you're just explaining something that's difficult to explain. So that's one thing that we do see quite a bit of. And then also what I love about psychedelics, and I mean, maybe on the business side, it's less, you know, exciting for some investor types, but you don't need it every day. You don't need it every month. Like, I mean, we do have returning guests, but maybe like once a year, if that, they come down, maybe every like 18 months. Like, we got some people who love coming down for their birthday because it's a nice reset for them. But it's just a wonderful thing that in a consumer, you know, society, especially medical consumerism, you're not having, you know, pop this pill every day. And so, you know, it's nice to be able to give something to someone that wherever they're at on the economic scale, you know, they're not going to have to find money every day for a pill just to feel normal.
So everything that you just shared in terms of you did probably the best job I've ever heard of someone explaining what the experience is like. I'm realizing, you know, me telling my friends or people that I want to try it, to bring them in on this experience. Like you said, it's like going to a different country almost. And you want people in your life to have that experience because you know it would help them. But what I'm realizing is over the years, I've been like, yeah, I felt more connected to God and, you know, and all these different things that they're almost too in the clouds. But when you bring it back down to earth and say things like, no, you're going to remember your experience, or you're going to want to be healthier or eat healthier, you kind of get a bird's eye view of your life, you know, all these different things. It makes it sound more manageable. And I think, you know, that's why I asked the question of how do you share this with other people, because it can be scary. And the breakdown you just gave, I'm going to listen back to this episode and take a lot of stuff. So when I revisit those conversations with certain friends, I'll know how to approach it better and give them a better understanding of what I experience, you know, when I'm using the medicine. So, oh man, this is good. I knew this was going to be good, Nick, but I mean, you exceeded my expectations today, man. So, and I already had high expectations for how good this podcast was going to be.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Let's pivot and talk about Wake. So I know that you're not just having people show up, try mushrooms, and go home, right? You're a tech guy. There's a lot more that goes into it. I know these are clinical retreats. There's a lot of technology incorporated into what you do. Can you just talk a little bit about, you know, about from A to Z, the experience that people are having on these retreats?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So they sign up online. They fill out a fairly lengthy intake because we really want to understand where they're coming from, what they've tried before, what medications they're currently on, if they're on any. And then we have a medical team that reviews it, gives them the thumbs up or gets on a call with them. We do have to decline some patients, and that's just really for their own safety. But you know, we look at everybody uniquely, and then they're invited on down. So then they book their ticket, they come on down, everything's all inclusive. So we pick you up from the airport with our private shuttle. You're brought to one of our retreat locations. We've got 2 on the island. They're both within about an hour and a half of the airport, so you're not in the AC van for long. But we greet you with a great driver and some coconut water, so you're ready to hydrate yourself after the flight. And then you arrive, and there's a nice, beautiful dinner for everybody. And then the next day, after a nice sleep, is the first dose. And so we start that first day of dosing anyway, the second day on island with yoga, breathwork, meditation in the morning, then a light breakfast. Then we go into our one-on-ones, which is a medical one-on-one. So in the medical one-on-one, we take their heart rate, their blood pressure, and we do an EEG brain scan. So that takes around 20 minutes total. And then they do a one-on-one with our clinical team there. So they discuss, you know, a little more of their intake, what they're hoping to get out of the experience, if they've tried psychedelics before, And that's where they work together on, okay, what's the best dose? So we grow our own mushrooms on the island, so we know exactly what goes into them. They're organic. We have 5 different varieties that we grow. We usually have 2 varieties on site. One's about a medium strength, one's a strong strength. And then we do a blend. So everybody gets a unique kind of customized blend for their first dose. That one's a little lower. We want to see how people interact with kind of our mushrooms and the whole experience. And then they have the option to go, we call it a booster, to go higher when they're in the experience. So we kind of like to give them a good baseline, and then an hour-ish around after they've taken their dose, they have the option to go higher if they want to. And we have pretty much a one-to-one as far as our staff and the guests ratio on site. So it's a really kind of intimate overall operation where we have around 6 to 12 guests. And it's a beautiful location. It's right in nature. It's quiet, it's safe. And then they come out of the experience. So that's usually a day experience. Then they're given the opportunity to journal, to share their experience, and then they just have a good night's rest. So that's their first dose. The day 2, we usually start with, again, breathwork, meditation, yoga, and then they go into integration, which is where they share their experience, they discuss it, they ask any questions they had. It's really just an overall kind of sharing, cathartic time for everybody. Then we have a fun day where they go either chasing waterfalls, or they go to the ocean, or both. And that's just a really nice kind of bonding kind of time for the group. And then they come back, and that's when we do their second dose, which is usually more of a night dose. And so that'll start at around 3 or 4 p.m., go until around 8 p.m.-ish, 8, 9. And it's wonderful for them to get that, because we get some beautiful lightning shows over the ocean. And so they're like, in it or coming out of it, and they get to see just nature being, powerful and doing nature's things without lots of thunder. So it's just a beautiful kind of, real scape that they get to see. And then the following day, we'll do another brain scan, blood pressure scan, heart rate scan. So over the experience, they have one before the first dose, one after the second dose, after the first dose, sorry, and before the second dose, and then one after the second dose. So we get 3 kind of snapshots of their body and their mind. And then after, so when they all head back to the airport and head back to their homes, then we offer group therapy. And then there's also the option to have one-on-one therapy with US trained therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists. And then we also monitor their what we call validated scales, which is really forms that are validated by the healthcare community to judge things like depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, traumatic brain injury, cognition. So those are incorporated as well. So we're really bringing the latest and greatest approved FDA technologies to this space so that people can see their own progression, and then also their physicians or their medical providers, as well as the overall research community, can also get some insight and see how it's helping them. So that's really helped the community at large get a better insight into some of our patient group and how it's helping different people from different walks of life. And then also them, and they're able to bring that to their regulators. So we've talked with a number of state regulators in the US that are looking to follow in the footsteps of Colorado and Oregon to legalize medically in their state, but they want to see some data, and they want to see how it's working for a particular subset of population, like veterans. So it's overall been really good. I mean, it speaks to my kind of geek side, and what I think that the world wants to see is like, okay, I've heard that, people feel better, but that's not enough for the medical community. They want to see some numbers. They want to see some data. And then for us as a company, doing our little role in this psychedelic renaissance, as it's called, how do we give some data to hopefully, progress or increase the acceptance across the US and across other countries to make this available to their population.
I love the level of care and thought that's gone into how you have set this up and how you approach it, not just from the experience side. Obviously, you've got all the boxes checked in terms of, medical care, the way you create space for integration. I think that's phenomenal. But I love that it's not just about the experience. Like, that would be good enough if you were just providing these experiences for people to have breakthroughs, but you've taken it a step further in utilizing that data for advocacy. I think that's incredible, man. And how long ago? It's been about 4 years, you said, I think, right? Since Wake was formed?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So, man, that's exciting. And you're just at the beginning, like, to think what this looks like 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now is really exciting to me. So I just want to say, in case I haven't thanked you directly, thank you for the work that you're doing, man. This is important work, and you're changing not only lives right now through the experiences of the retreats, but you're carving out the future for what this type of work looks like. And that's huge.
I appreciate that, Taj. And same to you, man. I mean, the work you're doing, we've had a number of athletes come down, and the role you're playing and your book and how you're helping athletes, pro, college, whatever, transition into that next phase of their life. It's so powerful because we've seen people at the exact same spot that you're seeing people. And so I really commend you for the work you're doing because it's absolutely needed.
Thank you, Nick. I appreciate you, man. I know that we were working on something. I don't know how far into detail you want to go on it. I know it's nothing set in stone yet, but can you talk a little bit about this partnership we have brewing going into 2024?
Yeah, happy to, Taj. We're growing as a company. We're growing, increasing the availability of retreat locations, retreat spots, even countries that we're operating in. We'll have some announcements coming in the next month here. We would love to invite some of Taj's community to come down to a retreat that's basically set up as a partnership between Taj and myself, so that athletes can continue to kind of follow in the footsteps of the Peace of Mind documentary and really allow for others to have access. So we're working on some sponsorship opportunities to kind of decrease the cost for people to come on down. And we're really excited to bring this to more and more athletes, because we've seen, as you'll see in the documentary, a huge kind of positive effect. And athletes are, people who the world looks up to. And so, personally, I was an athlete growing up. I really appreciate kind of the stress and the ups and downs basically of being an athlete. And then, if you don't make it pro or after pro, what do you do? And so we're really excited to offer, a retreat experience, the before, the after that we've kind of briefly discussed here, to Taj's community. And so we'll have kind of formal announcements coming soon. But if you're interested in coming down and you're an athlete, or really even anybody, but this partnership is definitely going to be focused more on the athletic side, please get in touch. So we'll both share it on our social medias when we're ready, but look for something in the next month here.
And Nick, this is super exciting to me because, like I told you, I've been sharing it by word of mouth for years, just the impact that psilocybin has had on me. And I know based on the experiences that folks that I am working with have, it can be impactful for them. Not everyone, of course, but people in certain stages. I'm like, this would change your life. Now I have better tools to be able to explain it to people. Now that we're working on this partnership to have more athletes attend these retreats, that's exciting to me because, it's so funny how things work out, man. I have been looking for a partnership like this for quite some time, and any companies or organizations I would look into, I didn't see a fit. And I had almost given up on it. I was like, maybe I'll just keep spreading it through word of mouth. Then I come across the Peace of Mind documentary and I'm like, wow, this is exactly what I've been looking for. And you and I connect, and here we are, man. So in divine timing, there are now opportunities to give this experience to other people. And I'm really grateful for that. And once again, really grateful for what you're doing, man.
Thank you, man. Likewise. Let's do some cool stuff together. We've met with so many different consultants and all that along the way. And they're like, what's your mission statement? What's your thing? And I'm like, more mushrooms to more people. And they're like, yeah. No, it's got to be more. And I'm like, that's what it is. Right. So, safely with science, everything around that. But the more that we can provide this as a first line or even a line of treatment to people, the better. So our goal is truly to make the ability to ingest safely psychedelics as well as the functional mushrooms as a first line of treatment. So, if you're struggling mentally in any way, try this before you get on to all the other crazy stuff, because it's always going to be there. Give this a try first rather than last.
Amen. More mushrooms, the more people. What else do you need? Incredible, man. Before we get out of here, please tell people if they want to get in touch with you, if they just want to connect with Wake Network or just follow the journey, what's the best way to do that?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can find me at nick@wake.net, and our main website is wake.net. And if you want to buy any of our non-psychedelic products, go to wakewell.net.
Awesome. And all of that will be in the show notes. Nick, thank you again for coming on and spending some time today with the Thrive After Sports family. This was an incredible episode. Looking forward to continuing to build, man. Keep doing what you're doing. It's needed, as you know.
Thank you, man. Right back at you. Really appreciate the time, Taj.